Welcome back to the Provisionist perspective, where we are firmly convinced that anyone and everyone can be saved, and we want you to be convinced of it too. I'm Drew.
And I'm Eric. And on today's program, we have returning our very special guest, Dr. Eric Hankins. And we had a wonderful conversation with him. He is dynamic. He's fantastic. We got all the way into it. We didn't hold back on anything about what's going on in the SBC and why things are the way they are and why nobody cares and what we can do about it. We didn't stay in despair. We talked about what we can do about it and the positive things that have happened too. He had a lot to say about the ground we have made and the hope that we do have for the representation of our soteriology. So I had a great time talking with him, and we hope to do that again with him. But I know that you're going to enjoy this conversation.
Here we go. Well, thank you very much, Brother Eric, for joining us again. So a little bit of a different topic today on Provisionism, Traditionalism in the Southern Baptist Convention. So before we begin, just tell us a little bit again about yourself and your what ministry you've been involved with and are involved with now.
Yeah, as I shared last time, my journey of faith began when my dad led me to Christ. My dad's a pastor, so I grew up in a great discipling environment. Answered a call to ministry at 18. I got married to my wife Janet at 20 when we were in college, and we've been married for 30 years this year. 3 kids, 1 grandkid on the way, and so blessed beyond measure in that area of my life, and been serving churches pretty much from 19 years old on as a youth minister and pastor. Did a bachelor's degree in religion at Louisiana College, and then a master's degree in biblical languages at New Orleans Seminary, and then a PhD in systematic theology at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth, and engaged this issue of soteriology and really lined out the traditionalist view of soteriology in about 2010, when I started having real kind of sharp engagements and disagreements with Calvinists in my church, and then some Calvinist pastors that I was in the same city with in Oxford, Mississippi, college town. John Piper had become very popular among college students, and so that really lifted that whole issue of Calvinism up in a much sharper way in my life, so much so that I felt like it might be interesting to see if I could spell out, since I wasn't a Calvinist, if I could spell out what I was.
Cool. Very good. And we did talk about this a little bit last time, but for those that might be tuning in for the first time this time, can you just touch on briefly what is the traditionalist statement of faith, and then what inspired you to write it? You've already highlighted just now a little bit of what inspired you to write it, but for those that are just tuning in, if you want to talk a little bit more about that.
Great. Yeah. Probably the process that I went through was my starting point was what most people would describe as 3-point Calvinism. I think that's what most Southern Baptists view their soteriology to be, that they affirm the total depravity, unconditional election, and perseverance of the saints. We reject limited atonement and irresistible grace. But that was very not sustainable in an intelligible way. It was just sort of a shorthand to kind of have this hodgepodge of soteriological beliefs, and it wouldn't hold up under sharp scrutiny from a Calvinist, and rightly so. And so I abandoned that and decided it was time to sort of see if I could reconstruct a picture of what I had always believed. I wasn't articulating new beliefs. I was just articulating what I had always believed without the
Right.
Calvinist infrastructure.
Right.
And when I did that, it produced, and I tried to do it as succinctly as possible. So I created this statement of affirmations and denials about the various aspects of soteriology that elucidated what I believed about how people get saved. And I did that in conversation with my dad and some other theologians. And over about a 6-week period, we generated it through the miracle of the internet and blogs. There's a pretty popular Southern Baptist blog, SBC Today, that Steve Lemke, who's a theology professor at New Orleans Seminary, was running it, and he was willing to put the statement up. It had been signed by a variety of very noteworthy Southern Baptists, and so it instantly got a lot of attention and started a subsequent discussion.
You know, one thing that I think is helpful for people to know about the Traditionalist Statement, as far as your formulation of it, was that it was not a response to this is what has come at me and this is what I don't believe. So kind of like a theology of negation, so much as it was this is kind of what I've always believed, but I need to get this down and articulate this in a clear manner. And then essentially, what ended up happening, throwing it out into the ether, and then it blows up and stuff. So, because some people have sort of misunderstood how that came about, I guess.
Yes, I think it got perceived instantly as an attack on Calvinists.
Right.
It wasn't. What I was trying to do is speak for people like me that I really didn't sense among our key leadership. The movement has been towards Calvinism and our seminaries and leadership positions and that sort of thing. But I still, and there was a Lifeway study that showed that the vast majority of Southern Baptist pastors don't think of themselves as being Calvinist. And so it was simply that. I know what Calvinists believe. Boy, do I know what Calvinists believe, because they never stop talking about it. But just set that to the side. Great, that's wonderful. That's what you believe. What do I believe? And then as somebody with professional background in systematic theology, I knew what it meant to do constructive theology, which is an important aspect of theological conversation. And then it needed to be cogent. Each statement needed to be able to go with the other statement, so that I was giving a coherent. Coherence is very important in systematic theology, and coherence was the problem. Three-point Calvinism is not coherent. That's why it's not attractive to anybody once it gets laid out. And so it was a desire to be clear, coherent, and I wrote it so that a Calvinist could not affirm it. And I think that's what. Why are you writing something that we can't affirm? You write stuff that I can't affirm. That's the nature of theology. I wanted to be able to make a distinction. And I didn't say this last time. I also wrote it so that it would be handy for churches, because I feel like where the real problems were is guys coming out of seminaries as Calvinists, going to non-Calvinist churches and really creating problems. And so I hope that it could be a resource that churches could say to a candidate, here, this is kind of what we all do about how people get saved. Where do you stand on these issues?
Right.
Yeah. So it must have really touched on something that a lot of people were having a problem with, because like how many people before the statement came out, how many people had that experience with somebody coming out, a young man coming out of a Reformed seminary, going to church and causing a ruckus or splitting it, some little self-Calvinism going on there.
As Brother Layton did at one point, right?
Yeah, that's what he did, right? He split his home church. He split his home church when he came out of seminary. So, he must have touched on something, because a lot of people grabbed onto it.
That's right. And when I laid that out in a programmatic way in the early days, and that's one of the things that no one tried to dispute. No one. It's not a problem in the churches. That never happens. No one even attempted to say that. Everyone knew it was creating problems. Now, the other side would say, well, these poor, uninformed, ignorant lay people. That's the problem.
They're reforming the church. We're reforming the church.
Yeah, I mean,
something to do.
And I don't disagree with that statement. I think that's part of the, and part of the reason that we exist here, at least in my mind, is, hey, let's get some resources out there that are accessible so that you can believe that this matters and that this is important, and that you have resources that you can either point to or use for yourself to, firm up your beliefs in this. So,
and let me say one more thing that I didn't say last time as well that I think is important. In the early going, I always knew that there were Calvinists that were Southern Baptists. I knew them, and we were friends, and they saw it their way, and I saw it mine, but it wasn't a first order issue. And so a guy that leaned a little more Reformed could go into a church, just make a big deal out of it, and was humble. This is the kind of way I see it, but I know I've got my way's got some holes in it and that kind of thing, and we're okay. And there was that's the way it worked. And then suddenly that wasn't good enough anymore, that we're going to lead with the front edge on this Reformed theology. And we're going to, the reason the Southern Baptist Convention is not functioning the way it should function is because we've abandoned Reformed theology, and we're going to return to it.
And is that essentially kind of coming from the founders ministry side of things? Is that kind of what you have in mind?
Yep, that's their vision. That's their stated vision.
And so, talk about that. The founders, that's their stated vision. For those of our listeners who don't know, what is the founders ministry? Who is producing that stated vision? And then what is the abstract of principles, and what role does that play in SBC academia?
Yeah, I'm not any sort of an expert on founders structure. I'm more familiar with the personalities and maybe a little bit of the history.
Yeah.
Tom Askell, Tom Nettles go way back. Tom Nettles was a longtime guy at Southern, and Askell is I think he's been pastoring for decades in Florida, but also has started this ministry. So it's an internet, that they've got a strong internet presence. There's a little publishing wing. They've got I think it's called The Sword and the Trowel, or something that's maybe a periodical that they've been producing for a long, long time.
They have a podcast now too, I'm pretty sure.
Right, and it's all well, I've through some of this SermonGate stuff, I've watched their stuff on SermonGate, and it's always really what they're smart guys. You don't have to guess what they think. And they believe that a corrective is a return to the doctrines of grace, to the 5 points of Calvinism, and that's what they want to see happen. And so they want to. There's a strong polemical element. Non-Calvinists are wrong, and they're wrong for these reasons, and they're vulnerable in these areas, and those vulnerabilities have resulted in pragmatism and easy believism, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we got to turn that around. And founders refers to the founders of Southern Seminary, who were all Calvinists, and then kind of plays on that idea of having a foundation on Reformed theology. And so that's who founders is. And so the abstract of principles is the belief statement that the founders of Southern Seminary wrote to be their statement of faith for the seminary. It is an abstract. I think it's an abstract of the Philadelphia Confession of Faith, which is sort of an American version of the London first and second London Confession, or the Second London Confession, 1689. I think that's right. Mm-hmm. So it's
and forgive my ignorance here, but what is an abstract? Is just a summary. Is it like a condensed?
And conveniently enough, it abstracts out limited atonement, because those guys knew back in the day, even though they were for limited atonement, Baptists weren't, and they were never going to get limited atonement across the finish line. And so they abstracted that out. They don't deny it, but it's not affirmed.
Okay, right.
It's a 4-point Calvinist document. And one of the arguments that I make in a paper I wrote called About Loyal Opposition is it makes absolutely no sense to me that two of our seminaries have another confessional statement besides the Baptist Faith and Message. And the abstract of principles was for instance, Al Mohler's. It gave him absolutely a green light that he stated from the beginning to put his school back on a Reformed footing. That's because the abstract of principles is Reformed in its soteriology. So and its view of God's foreknowledge, et cetera, et cetera. So the abstract of principles, I think, is the confessional statement for founders ministries, and they want to see the whole. They really want to see the whole church return to the whole Southern Baptist Convention, sort of be on that abstract of principles footing.
So the abstract of principles, the role that it plays in SBC academia is that it is the founding document of Southern, which is the biggest SBC seminary by far, right?
Correct, and the one that would be viewed as the most. It's our theological seminary,
right? Setting the pace for the rest of the other seminaries, and it's it's Al Mohler, right? I mean, it's right. Okay. Now I did some research into the other SBC seminaries. You know Southern, you know Al, you know what's going on there. But I did some research into the other SBC seminaries. We did an episode on this, and
we'll link it right over here.
Yeah, it'll be by the magic of the internet. It'll be somewhere. And what we found was that the main ethic on both sides, Calvinist, non-Calvinist, was to never talk about Calvinism. When they would be all in the same room for a conference or something like that, they would applaud themselves and other theology department chairs, like people who are pastoring other churches in areas of the country, they would applaud them for how little they talk about Calvinism from the pulpit. Do you think that's an accurate description of one of the main ethos within SBC academia?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly that's the ethos is let's not make a big deal out of this. So I guess what has driven my thinking all along is you don't make a big deal out of it in certain places, but then in all of the theology classes, it's all Grudem all the time, all Horton all the time.
Right.
All Don Carson all the time. So
you teach it, and then you say unity, peace.
Right.
But I don't do it from the pulpit, though. I don't make my congregation affirm it. But then when I go to my other job at my department chair, my theology department chair job, I teach it.
Yes, and again, I don't know what guys teach in their classes,
right.
But I have this when I look at what syllabi are being used, and frankly, when I interact with seminary graduates, they're Reformed when they come out. I don't have this statistic right to hand, but that Lifeway study that examined Calvinism showed an inverse relationship between the number of Calvinists in the churches and the number of Calvinists coming out of the seminaries. Way more Calvinists coming out of the seminaries than was proportional for.
Yeah, I looked at that. When I was looking into this, and it was something like 10% of SBC churches are Reformed, but 60-something%.
Yeah, I think that's right. Something.
And that was 10 years ago, over 10 years ago. So it's more now, obviously, because the internet has only proliferated.
Right. There's no reason for me to think it's less.
Yeah.
And so that's exactly right. And so all I want to say is that what we want? I mean, is that
right?
Because it didn't used to be that way. So something changed. What was it? And is that what we want? And then when you listen to the things that, for instance, Al Mohler says, is he would say, yes, that's what I'm teaching according to the Baptist. I'm teaching according to the abstract principles. We're an abstract principle school. You're going to get abstract principle students.
Right.
So then what I want to say is we probably need to check with the people who are in the pews. I don't think they know that that's the ratio coming out of the seminaries that they're paying for. And so perhaps we should have a conversation about whether or not that's what the Southern Baptists in the pews are thinking. Because
for those that
go ahead.
And for those that aren't in the know in terms of our viewers on this, there is a direct connection between, because this is one of the things that has made the Southern Baptist Convention and stuff so successful in terms of missions and seminary and stuff, is the cooperative program, where you're giving to your local church, and then essentially in large part that's helping to fund the seminaries, subsidize education for members of Southern Baptist churches and stuff. Does that sound about right to you? I don't know all of the numbers on it, but that's kind of the reason why you would ask the question, do the Christian normies in the churches know about this stuff? So
then when the message is, and all that's going on, but then the message to us Provisionists, Traditionalists, speaking in the context of the SBC is, peace, peace. And yet, as you say in your loyal opposition speech or paper, that everything, and you just said it earlier now, is that everything that the founders have been doing has been in plain sight. The abstract principles, this is an explicitly Reformed doctrine. This seems to be a double standard. So talk me down off this ledge. Aren't these calls for peace just a way to silence Provisionist Traditionalists so that the Reformed hegemony can continue?
My instinct would be that it's probably a little less conscious than that. My gut is that when you win, and you won, then why talk about it?
Right. Which game over, right? I mean, that's part of the.
You just say scoreboard. The guy comes after you after the game and he's chirping in your ear and just goes scoreboard. The game's over.
Yeah. And so why it's over? We won. It's like whining after. Yeah. It's like the player on the losing team wanting to keep, yapping about it after the game is over. Let's just.
I had 25 points and I got a steal on you, and it's like scoreboard.
Yeah. Yeah. We've moved on from that. And that's the way anybody who wins feels. So, I think it's more of that. I think that's probably the essence of the attitude.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then you also said in loyal opposition that there is, and this is one of the most interesting parts of this to me, because I felt like I was taking crazy pills when I was seeing all these things, and then you were saying this stuff that I was seeing, because you've been seeing it for years, long before I ever got involved in the scene at all, even just from an outsider looking in perspective. What you said in loyal opposition is that there is zero political will to change the current state of affairs in SBC academia and the convention leadership. And this seems to me to have only decreased further in the last 4 years, since they're busy fighting critical race theory and Sermon-Gate, which are important fights. But why do you think that is? Why are the vast majority of traditionalists, provisionists, whosoever will, convention attenders and voting pastors who make up the vast majority of convention members, why do they seem so apathetic about the soteriological bent of academia and the leadership?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think your instinct is we have these much larger cultural issues that are going on, and so there's this sense we need each other. We've got bigger fish to fry, which fair enough.
Yeah,
and you see it in the Conservative Baptist Network's conscious statement. This is not about soteriology. We are arguing about a bunch of stuff. One of the things we're not arguing about is soteriology. I mean, that is laid out. And that's really in order to forge a coalition with founders. It's founders and Conservative Baptist Network together to stand against the woke movement in the convention, which I'm very concerned about, frankly. And so it may just be, and so I'm gonna sing like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but let me just walk this out, and then y'all can pick it apart if you'd like to. So on one hand, we do have these bigger issues. On the other hand, because traditionalists took a stand, we announced we're here, we're paying attention, and there was this ethos that says, let's not talk about it. When you would put a J.D. Greear up on stage and push him, he would say, I'm not a Calvinist. You push a lot of these guys that are not super thoughtful, and not everybody's a deep thinker. And so they're just kind of reformed because it's cool and it's the cool thing to be, which when you start to push them on it, when you say things like, oh, so you don't believe anyone can be saved? I believe anyone can be saved. Yeah, I don't think you're reformed. So it's so the fact that with many of them, without a whole lot of pushing at all, you'll get them to back down off of they don't sound like founders, what the founders ministry guys really want them saying. And so it may be we were successful in some ways of bringing an issue to light that I don't think was well understood at all. So at least no one's super comfortable embracing 5-point Calvinism where anybody can hear it. And we may have been heading to a day when it was the founder's vision is everybody cheering.
Right.
Great. All 5 of those points are yes. That is gospel. Well, you can't do that. And there's probably a lot to be said for that. And I think that goes with this as y'all can help me make this sound cogent as we talk. But the other thing is, while there's a lack of that representation, I think, among leaders, I think Baptists, by and large, are still not Calvinists. I just think the rank and file ordinary person can't do all the gymnastics that Calvinism requires anyway, and so it may be almost a meh, whatever. Yeah, that's what those eggheads up there believe, but nobody really believes that. And I'm telling you what, there's a long 100-year-long history of that being how Southern Baptists work. Those guys over at Southern Seminary, they're all got the big thick books walking around, but the rest of us, we're just trying to win people to Jesus and reach the nations and keep our farms plowed and that kind of thing. And so,
yeah. But that we have sensed that. Drew, right? We have sensed that, and that drives us a little insane. Because we think they should care, and again, and this is where you can push back on us, and tell us that we're you guys are on the internet and you run a soteriology podcast, so of course you think that. Like you can tell us that we're out of touch, because we probably are, but we wish they would care about that. It's not just for the eggheads over there at Southern, that it's for them too.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. And that goes all the way back to what got me involved in this in the first place. Is certainly I care about theology, and I love what the majoritarian view. I think it's biblical and it's robust and it's right. And that's the view that drove the glorious years of for instance, the Southern Baptist Convention, where we were winning people to Jesus like crazy. And, evangelism was at the very center of what we did. And it was because we thought anyone could be saved. We thought everyone needed to hear the gospel, and everyone who heard the gospel could be saved. So we should be right now, all of us, going out and telling people that they ought to invest their energy in the work of evangelism, because a personal decision for Christ is the most important thing that can happen to anyone on the planet. And I know this just from ministry. One of the hardest things in the world in my life, personally, honestly, and with churches, is to keep them focused on that. Man, do we drift? We drift from personal evangelism instantly. We would much rather do something else than that. And So we need to have a theology that has that at the front edge. Who did you share Christ with today? Don't you realize that the only difference between the difference maker in somebody's eternal destiny is them hearing the gospel and saying yes to Jesus? And so everybody's got to know. And if that's going to happen, we got to get to work on that today. And I think when the focus moves away from a gospel for all mentality, I think that hurts. I think that hurts our mission.
Yeah, and for I've not talked much about my story, I don't think, on this podcast, but I cut my evangelistic gospel sharing teeth at a Southern Baptist church. That's where I grew. I grew up at one church, and then I went off to uni, and then I was attending to that church, and that's where they really kind of put into me this gospel sharing DNA. And I had shared the gospel with, I don't think I would be exaggerating if I said, a few hundred people in my 4 years. Students going out on Wednesday night outreach and stuff like that, knocking on doors on campus and stuff. And then I encountered this Calvinism, Reformed Theology and stuff at the very end of my uni career. And regarding sharing faith, I think that was one of the things that was most disturbing to me was hearing these ideas and then thinking, so what you're telling me is that for these people that I talked with, and I don't think anybody made a positive decision. There was one group of guys who were baseball players on the UNCW baseball team that came to faith. I'll never forget that night. That was really cool. And but we didn't have, or I personally didn't have very many positive decisions. And so I was looking back and I was saying, so you're telling me that all of them, when they heard what I was sharing with them, were not necessarily able to believe it and be saved? That maybe, they just weren't chosen and stuff like that. And that, hit me. And I was like, well, I feel really uncomfortable with this. And much like you talked about briefly in the last episode regarding Romans 9 briefly, if these truths come at us, then we don't just get to say, oh, this is uncomfortable. No, I don't believe this. I'm going to take my Sharpie and just take Romans 9 out of my Bible, and ignore it or whatever else. But it does have significant implications for how you view what you do in terms of how you're, sharing faith and stuff like that. And it, obviously we're both, what's the phrase? We're both red-pilled, Eric and I. So we feel like this matters, to your point about, the normie in the congregation. There was what I would have perceived to be a traditionalist Southern Baptist church that my Nana and Grandpa went to. They've since passed within recent years. And that I had some friends going along to, and they were teaching through Romans. And I was like, oh, yes, I'm just waiting. I'm just like on YouTube waiting for that, one to come up so I can listen, because I want to know. I want to know what they believe about this, because it was a church also that I was considering approaching, and at one stage did approach with regards to partnership with what we do here in New Zealand with university students. And so I listened to this message and I was like, that sounds a little bit reformed, and so I sent this friend of mine like, hey, here's this. I sent her a video from Brother Layton, a short little one on Romans 9, and said, hey, I'd encourage you to check this out. I know you guys are studying through Romans. I think this was before they did it, and I sent it to them, and they were just kind of like, oh yeah, this is fine. And, never really heard much anything else about it and stuff like that. But I'm just like, this matters. It's important.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. So I think what we're talking through, and this is the complexity of the theological endeavor. These are hard ideas.
Yeah.
They're interlocking. They have to do with theology. They have to do with practice. They have to do with ministry and how to engage the culture. What's the most important? There is a kind of person who really loves to think and to learn and to know as much as they can. And there are a lot of people who they're fine just with the basics, and then they don't want to read a big thick book. And And so how do you get, how do you feed all those dynamics into this discussion? But Eric, back to what you were saying is I do think that it's incumbent upon us to have as robust an articulation of what we believe as Reformed people give of what they believe. The gospel's beautiful. The good news of the gospel for all is the best idea in the world, and it ought to be powerfully articulated. Not everyone needs an extensive, multi-layered articulation of that. Fair enough, but a lot of people do, and they're not really hearing it in a lot of places. And so I think we do have a duty to the Lord and to the church to make that as clear and as powerful as the scriptures say it is.
That'll preach. That'll preach right there. And so if we're talking about change, and what do we do then? One of your first prescription in your loyal opposition speech, your first prescription was, and I quote here: traditionalism must function as a strategy for rigorous theological engagement and debate with Calvinism until we reach a coherent conclusion about our soteriological first principles, end quote. I think that's fair to say that this hasn't happened.
Right.
I guess we talked a little bit about why, but that hasn't happened, right?
And really, this is the part where you start to walk out on a high wire without a net. The Calvinist view and my view are not compatible. They're mutually exclusive when you get down to the nitty gritty. So you got two options. We can go back to the status quo ante, which is the way things were before, and that's fine. In secondary matters, liberty, isn't that the theological triage? In non-negotiable matters, unity; in debatable matters, charity; and in non-negotiable matters, unity; in negotiable matters, liberty; and in all things, charity. And so for a long time, we held, the finer points of soteriology to be secondary, and granted each other liberty, and we were happy with each other, and nobody was insulting, and nobody was saying that's not the gospel, and you're ruining the church, and you're the reason why there's been decline and downgrade and all this sort of stuff. We weren't doing that. And then all of a sudden we started doing that, pointing fingers and getting ill with each other. So we could go back. We could go back to that before, or because I think I articulate this in that paper you're referring to as well, is the Baptist faith and message isn't coherent. It's just not. Okay.
Frustratingly incoherent.
When it's a secondary matter, it's a helpful incoherence. Everybody kind of has a little part. It worked pretty well for a lot of decades. But if we're going to press the issues, then we're going to press the issues. And then it's going to come down to changing the Baptist faith and message to make it coherent. And somebody's going to wind up on one side of that deal, and somebody's going to wind up on the other. And so I do think that nobody likes that conversation. And I had a guy come to me after I delivered that speech, a guy, you wouldn't know his name. And he said, if your prescriptions are followed, they will wreck the Southern Baptist Convention.
That's a heavy accusation.
Meaning if what you want in terms of soteriologically to be articulated is followed, then this soteriological perspective, these Christians will wreck the Southern Baptist. Is that what you were saying? I misunderstood the prescription.
The prescription would be if we define what is undefined, or we make coherent what is incoherent.
Right.
It logically follows that either the Calvinist will be in or the non-Calvinist will be in.
Yeah. And that's a tough choice. That's as I was rereading your loyal opposition thing, which we'll put the link in the description for those of you that want to read it, and it's entirely that it's challenging because as soon as you said once you engage in the theological endeavor and you start making some positive cases and you say this is the truth, this is what I believe, you on board or not, then it's starting to create, for lack of a better term, division in terms of like, separation of ideas and that, not in terms of like dividing, in a negative way, but in terms of precision, I guess, type of thing.
Yeah.
So.
And here's what that makes me think. I thought of this idea as well. I don't think I could sign the abstract of principles. If I take it seriously for what it really means. A lot of guys, they just hold their mouth kind of funny and but so here's the deal. I'm a Southern Baptist. I lead my church to contribute generously to the Cooperative Baptist program, but there's a seminary that would not hire me.
There are two, right?
Two seminaries.
Yeah.
That would not hire me, even though I can boldly affirm the Baptist Faith and Message 2000. Put my hand over my heart.
Right. Yeah. That's a problem.
Is everybody aware of that? Everybody feeling good about that?
Yeah. And we talked about that a little bit in the episode that Eric mentioned. And there's a permit word that you can just hold on to and be like, yes, okay, he permits. This is my, kind of Calvinist thing that I can hold on to here. But teensy little bit of crazy making pushback just on my part is one thing that I noticed in rereading Brother Kenneth Keithley's Salvation and Sovereignty was he started from a point of here's what we affirm as a school abstract of principles, and this is how my soteriological Molinist approach fits into the abstract of principles. And so it was like, this is a confessionally informed, maybe not soteriological position, but in terms of the decretal decree aspect of it. And I thought that was like you said, and you said this in your loyal opposition speech, was that imagine if, for instance, we took the Traditionalist Statement and said, all right, here we go. We're going to put this up on these other seminaries, and this is what you have to sign to get in. That wouldn't even be remotely okay. But for some reason,
That's right. And I'm not sitting here saying that these questions of how the body politic and confessional statements, I'm all for some flexibility in that, and unless everybody decides they do want to have a fight, and so we start taking swings at each other and pointing and criticizing each other. Well, then let's go ahead and have the whole discussion, because it doesn't sound like we're saying this is a secondary matter and we're gonna be
right
at a liberty. We're elevating this to a first order matter, and somebody's going to win and somebody's going to lose. And so, because in so many ways at the seminary level, one point of view has won, they've already effectively won. Why keep fighting?
Right. Yeah, we've said that's have been one of our mantras, where we'll be in the middle of an episode about something else, and then we'll go on this rant again, like we've done 4 or 5 times since we started this podcast, which is they've won. Do you care? We've done that several times, and on that front, I think we're pushing sort of some of these levers as to how do you make change, and how do you affect some of these things? What would it look like to push some of these levers? And one of them that I wanted to push, and this is a position of mine, and I think Drew holds this to some degree, and I would like some pushback from a scholar on this. So pushback, I'm in this, but I understand the limitations of social media as a medium and the internet in general, and those limitations are heavy and they are various. And I also recognize how utterly self-serving this position is. Okay. But I think that if you're a scholar and you want to win hearts and minds to your cause, you cannot do that today without putting your content on the internet in some fashion. What do you think about that?
You're right, and to my shame, I say you're right, because one of my other struggles in the whole process is when it, after that first year, when I started to realize how demanding that process is.
The public scrutiny process.
Public scrutiny and I didn't have the internet's just weird. It's this strange, wild world. Do I have to respond to everybody who makes a comment?
Right.
It's 3 a.m. and I'm still
that block button is just beautiful and gorgeous.
That's why Eric isn't as super active on Twitter, is because he's just been there and he's like,
But honestly, that really is pretty true. Although I don't think it's a justification for my lack of engagement. So what happened in the early days is I'm a pastor. I have a job,
Yeah.
And I went through a period, and I was letting my leadership know, and they were very generous about allowing me time to do that. But it was day and night.
Yeah.
And I knew that probably what I ought to do was try to lead a little bit more, but I didn't want to run it. And that was the whole. That's why it kind of flamed out.
You're talking about like traditionalism, any sort of structure around it.
Correct.
If you could have led it, but so you had this path. Maybe what you're saying is you had this path where you saw you could either go to do this thing you've been called to do that you've been doing since you were 20 years old and pastoral ministry, or you could go do this crazy internet world trying to do this structure thing, and you were like, no.
Right.
I can't do it. Well, I can't. I knew that time-wise that I didn't know.
You would have had to make a choice.
I had three problems. So I had the time issue. I had the knowledge gap. I knew that I was going to take some time to understand how to be an internet presence, how to manage a social media presence, and how often you need to. I talked to some guys about that, but you got to keep putting up content, as you guys well know. And then by temperament, I'm more of an idea guy, and so you need me to generate detail. Now I love detail, but I'm not going to say anything that I can't footnote. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to write anything that I don't think is kind of peer review quality stuff. And so
that's not the internet.
That's not the internet. My 400-word blog post would take me 20 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just knew that wasn't going to work. And so, and everybody's being mean. So the fourth thing is I'm getting my head knocked in.
Yeah.
And, it was easy to talk myself into saying, I can't give leadership to that. Somebody else needs to do that. And when somebody else does it, the way they want to do it. And it tended to be, God bless them, but it just tended to be those blogger types that were, sometimes it was not great.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
And
it's not in your control, and it goes in a direction that you don't have your finger on and you can't do anything about. And
right. And so when I wanted to say, that's no good. No one believes that. Yeah, that's that's blind heresy. I was trying to just say, hey, no, that is the wrong attitude. Or even frankly, sometimes that's the wrong guy. That guy's not a good representative of what we're about.
Well, that's what happened, right? There was something being run, and the person made a decision, and now it's all gone.
Now it's gone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So back to the original question, but that does not absolve any of us of giving our best, and it's like Well, and it's, I read a great book about Martin Luther's use of the printing press called Brand of Luther. It's a great book. It's just he mastered
his pamphlets, and yeah.
And a big part of his success is he bought in to the new technology when the Catholic Church was like, we're not using that, we use books to write our,
YouTube Shorts.
Yeah.
Eric? YouTube Shorts.
Yeah. And so he beat them. They were dead before they hit the ground because he had already figured out where, and Luther had this head for, where the ink came from, where to get the cheap paper. I mean, he understood the technology, and then he's brilliant. And that is the perfect analogy of the Reformed guys. They understood the technology, and they're smart. I mean, you can say a lot about them. Dumb, they're not dumb. And they were light years ahead of us instantly.
Yeah, somebody who really understands the medium, I think, is James White. That he plays, and this is how I put it. When somebody tries to get me to explain this guy, is that I think he's playing a character, and I think he knows what he's doing in terms of an audience, keeping an audience, having a following, and what his audience wants. I think he's playing that character really, really well.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, he went after me I preached at New Orleans and on election, and he hammer and tongs. But I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, I don't think he listened to my sermon.
He recently critiqued and we want to do a response to this soon, but he recently critiqued a blog that Eric and I sort of wrote together. I was having a conversation with a guy online, a Calvinist brother who I just had on. You can see the episode from last week with Brother Zach Avery. And he critiqued it. And Eric, I assume you've listened to all of it by now. I don't know if you have or not, but I listened to it and I was like, he just spent 50 minutes and he's only a quarter of the way into our article right now. and then he blazed through the last little bit, and Eric had some real poignant questions that I had asked at the end, and he said, I hope that some Reformed scholars or someone will take this up and answer Drew's questions. And he just read them and he was like, oh yeah, this is good. Yeah. And I was like, this is not what just happened.
Yeah, here's something I'm still, I don't think I've grabbed onto. Here's an example of what you're talking about. So I published this paper on Romans 9. It's been 3 years ago. Now, maybe the reason no one has engaged it is because it's terrible and I'm nobody. That's a perfectly reasonable hypothesis. But nobody's said, oh no, he's wrong here, and here. And it's been blogged about. I've done podcasts about it. So it's not like it's not out there.
On our next episode of the Provisionist.
Yeah, for real. So let's do it. Let's get our scheduling heads together and let's do something on that, because I read that and it's really well done and you make some solid arguments there. And if you want some people to engage with what you're saying, we have a little bit of experience with getting people mad at us. So we can arrange that for you.
And again, as a scholar, honestly, I did get my skin thickened up for that kind of engagement through PhD studies. I mean, you get in there and wear each other out. I think that's the only way to do it. So if there's a big hole, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, for sure.
It'll make me better. I'll either have an answer or I won't. But boy, there's just been no interest from now. There's interest from our side, but no one has said no. He's wrong here, and here. And where I was going with all that is because they don't have to. You just pick
scoreboard.
Yeah, and you just pick something you can sort of straw man and impress everybody. Beat this thing up and then you just move on to the next.
James White owns Eric Hankins.
Yes.
And he immediately regrets it.
There you go. Yes.
So you said in your speech, which is now kind of like a little blog article, that we are in the, so I quote, "We are in the driver's seat in terms of theological scholarship, and we need to start acting like it, speaking like it, and writing like it." So can you elaborate a little bit on that statement a bit? So we're often reminded by our Reformed interlocutors, online and stuff that we mentioned, that they've really driven missions and evangelism and stuff like this. But so can you comment on that as well as elaborating a little bit on what you said there?
Yeah, I think the case cannot be made that Reformed theology drives robust evangelism. Here's the facts. It's a Pentecostal religion. It's not religion, but it's Pentecostal Christianity that's the worldwide phenomena.
It's true.
Which tends to be very revivalist.
That's right.
Very repent and believe. Yeah.
So, and that's really stands outside of our tradition. So I'm not sitting and saying, yeah, us and the charismatics are getting it done.
Yeah.
We would be different from them. But if you just want to talk about who's seeing unbelievable growth, that's who's putting the rest of us to shame,
Right.
But that's a gospel for all. Now I'll tell you that we do share that. The gospel's for everybody, and you should be sharing that good news with every single person, because anyone can be saved. I believe that historically and even proven now is what is the fundament of robust evangelism is God loves everyone. Christ died for the sins of everyone, and anyone can be saved. And so that's who we are, and we ought to be passionate and thrilled about it. And then in terms of articulating that, what I mean is we need guys working on their PhDs. We need guys not reluctant to get a PhD at Southern, but to
slog it out
from a traditionalist perspective, do it from a provisionalist perspective, and get in there and have those important conversations and get real sharp, sharpen your skills, and then write books, write articles,
and then put them online.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Put them online. And be sharp. I think a lot of times as I see some stuff, that's from our perspective, but it's not careful. You haven't thought through things. And so you leave yourself vulnerable. And let me tell you, the Reform guys, you give them, a crack.
Be precise.
They come, man, they'll dismantle you. So those are my thoughts.
A lament that I have in this actually is that as I started exploring the anyone can be saved and some of the journal articles and stuff that are in the, Baptistic tradition, which I don't hold 100% to a lot of the things that I grew up believing. But all those journal articles are online and stuff. And I feel like it's like, people don't know that they're there, and it's such a good resource and stuff. And I was like, oh man, like this is so good. And it's just not really, whether website formatted or being pushed or whatever else, or accessible to and it is a little bit, technical, a lot of the stuff,
right.
But I would say, relatively accessible and stuff. And so that's one thing that I wish more people knew about as well, is there's some really good resources there. That people can tap into.
You read the Founders Ministry story. Those guys were printing up books of Boyce's or Broadus's theology, one of those guys, and they would just go to seminary campuses and hand them out. Just stand outside of the chapel after chapel was out and just, you guys need to read this. And it's not electronic copies, and it's a book that thick.
Right.
They were
Right.
serious about it. They put their money where their mouth was. They believed in it, and they stayed with it. It took a long time. They were the odd guys. They were the man, those nuts. You know.
Yeah.
Can you believe they think that? But
yeah.
But their diligence, and then the mastery of with the sea change of the internet, they were
in there. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they had like you said, and they had the popular pastors. You know, it was cool to be a fan of Piper and MacArthur and Driscoll before the fall.
Right. You had this coalescing, and it's the pendulum swing, because there's always going to be this little pendulum swing between Calvinism and I don't like to use the word Calvinism, Arminianism, but you get my point. And so we had been way over, and I think had swung over into some overly pragmatic. When your baptistry shoots fireworks and has spinning wheels and confetti.
The easy believism.
Kind of right. Yeah, that's not. But Adrian Rogers didn't think that's how you should do it.
Right.
He didn't think that was a New Testament approach to evangelism and discipleship. So, but the spirit of the day was to react a little bit to what the previous generation was doing. So you had that whole intergenerational thing, and people want to, they want their own identity. So you have a lot of those forces at a lot of levels that coalesce. And like you said, who could have predicted a John Piper that just burst onto the scene? And
he's so prolific too. He's so incredibly prolific.
Oh my gosh.
Him and John MacArthur have done a phenomenal job. You go to the website, you want to find a sermon on X passage, you click Matthew, you go to this chapter and stuff. It's phenomenal. I've used before becoming woke to all of this to where I get triggered because I hear stuff. It was a great resource, but now it does feel like, once you get a bit red pilled, there's a little bit too many bones to pick out of your teeth, in terms of eating the meat. But yeah, prolific and phenomenal, great resources and stuff. Like on cultural issues, you got Desiring God addressing all these issues, the Gospel Coalition, say what you want about, there's a decent amount of pushback on them. It seems like recently, but
I'm not ashamed to say that I routinely go to both of those websites.
Yeah.
And often find things that are smart and things I agree with and that help to shape how we communicate that. Absolutely. And so we've got to start doing the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I wonder what it'll take. I wonder if it'll take a person or an event or some structure that people can get behind. I wonder what it'll be that will be that resource that rises, because I'm thinking of something like the Daily Wire, right, for conservative media, like something that now has more traffic on the internet than Washington Post, New York, all these other legacy media things combined. Now Daily Wire's kicking all their butts and they're mad about it. And so, I wonder what it's going to be for our soteriological viewpoint to kind of capture the majority opinion, the majority position, capture it and actually mobilize it.
Yeah, and here may be a fun little thought experiment, because I've had this, because I'm a serious opponent of the whole woke deal.
Yeah,
and I think it augurs well with our soteriological view, because we privilege the personal response of faith. If you read Divided by Faith, that's the cool book that all the Reformed guys read. Is the social justice. It's the SJW handbook for
is it really
woke Christian stuff, right? And what they say is, here's the problem with the evangelicals: they put way too much. When you ask them what is the reason why people struggle, because of the social systems around them or because of personal responsibility, And evangelicals at the time overwhelmingly said, well, it's personal responsibility. And the book Divided by Faith saw that as a negative. See, it's blaming the victim, and that's, it's not taken seriously the challenges of growing up with all these things against you. And so we need to modulate that emphasis on personal responsibility. And I think that's dead wrong. Dead wrong. I think it would be curtains for the church for two reasons. One is we believe that personal transformation of the gospel is people's only hope. Whatever else happens, great. But they've got to come to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Okay?
Yeah.
That's what we're good at. That's what we do. And then as I said earlier, it is very hard to keep a church focused just on that one task of sharing Jesus with lost people. And you let them hand a cup of water in Jesus' name, and they'll take that option every single time. And they'll feel like they've done something good for Jesus and then go on about their business. And so our emphasis is keeping both eyeballs on one thing, and that is the individual decision of faith. And our soteriology says that's the critical feature. And I think our contribution to this cultural moment is to say loud and proud, it is personal responsibility. That is the answer to what ails us. It is not to re-engineer society. Been tried, it failed, it doesn't work, and it's not redemptive. And so I'm wondering if with this, because I feel the opportunity to swing things away from all this woke stuff, with the opposition to CRT, people don't like this stuff. And I think we're well positioned to speak theologically into that, if we'll take advantage of the opportunity.
I like it.
Let's get it. Let's do it.
Sign me up for that.
And because here's where I'm trying to go. We're sort of made to feel a little bit bad about our emphasis on personal responsibility. That's even the criticism. Right. All you care about is people praying that sinner's prayer. Heaven forbid people should pray a sinner's prayer.
If we called it the tax collector's prayer, do you think people would shut up about it? God have mercy on the sinner.
Right. And so I think there's an opportunity to say, no, we're feeling great about our emphasis on the call to a personal response of faith. That's kind of our only business. And and to abandon it would be the worst sort of mistake we could make.
Amen. Yeah, I mean, I have a vision for, I want to see a coalition, if you will, of blogs and podcasts and different stuff like Soteriology 101, like us at the Provisionist Perspective. You've got the Bible Bro Down, Idol Killer. You've got a lot of people out there with this whosoever will theology. And can we get, is it possible? Can we get this, desiringjesus.org off the, I don't know, but you get the point. I want to see it happen, but I don't have the skills or the influence to make it happen. So it's a prayer point.
But that was the same process that probably generated Gospel Coalition. Is at some point, somebody's got to make the jump to say, we're going to have to try to get some venture capital, and we got to pay some people to edit this thing and kind of run it and keep it on the rails and give it a consistent message, and that's going to take full-time attention, and maybe we're closer to that than we think. But that's what it'll take.
From your mouth to the providence of God. I hope that.
Amen. So be it.
Yeah.
Some great encouraging stuff today from Brother Eric, firmly believing that anyone and everyone can be saved, and keeping the gospel at the forefront, emphasizing a personal response of faith, and keeping evangelism at the front of what we do as Christians and not losing sight of that and not getting sidetracked in some other things. So really good conversation, great stuff. Join our team, our patron team, and help support what we do here at the Provisionist Perspective. We also have a join button here on YouTube. I don't know if you've noticed, but I have my new camera here, and so things are hopefully looking a little bit better and a little bit more spruced up. We're going to keep making these episodes, and so join us if you'd like, and we'll see you around next time on the Provisionist Perspective.